I didn't realize my roommate was jealous of my friend until I saw the way his jaw tightened when George laughed and touched my arm. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Edward wasn't the jealous type. He was calm, composed, almost annoyingly mature about everything. We'd been living together for 6 months, and not once had I seen him lose his cool. Not when I forgot to pay the electricity bill on time. Not when I brought random dates over. Not even when I accidentally shrank his favorite hoodie in the dryer. But that night was different. For context, we're all 23. Adults. Fully grown men who should be able to handle basic emotions without acting like teenagers. Edward is my roommate. We met through a mutual friend when I was desperately looking for a place after my lease ended. George, on the other hand, has been my best friend since sophomore year of college. Completely different vibe. Loud, sarcastic, always throwing an arm over my shoulder like he owns me. Edward is quieter, observant, the kind of guy who listens more than he talks. Tall, dark hair, sharp eyes that always look like they're calculating something. He works from home most days, so he's around a lot. George practically lives outside. That Friday, George came over like he usually does. We ordered pizza, put on some dumb action movie, and ended up half watching it while roasting each other. At some point, George grabbed my face dramatically because I wouldn't admit he was right about something stupid. Say it. He laughed, squeezing my cheeks. Never, I mumbled. He grinned and shook me slightly. You love me. Unfortunately, we were both laughing. And that's when I noticed Edward. He was sitting in the armchair across the room, beer in hand. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't annoyed either. He just looked tight, like something inside him had locked into place. You good? I asked him casually. Yeah, he said, too quick. Why wouldn't I be? George flopped back against the couch, throwing an arm across my shoulders like always. Because you're third-wheeling our bromance, man. Edward's eyes flicked to George's arm around me. Just for a second. But I saw it. It's fine, Edward said evenly. I don't mind. But he did. I could feel it. The rest of the night, Edward barely spoke. And that was unusual. Normally, he'd at least jump into our arguments or throw in a dry comment that somehow shut us both up. Instead, he just watched. Watched George. Watched me. When George left around midnight, he pulled me into a quick hug at the door. Text me when you wake up, he said. We're hitting the gym tomorrow. Yeah. I shut the door and turned around, and Edward was standing right there in the hallway. Close. Too close. You and George are close, he said. I shrugged. Yeah, he's my best friend. Edward nodded slowly, like he was processing that information as if it were new. Does he always touch you like that? The question caught me off guard. What? The grabbing. The hugging. The arm thing. I laughed. Yeah, that's just George. He's like that with everyone. Edward's expression didn't change. Doesn't seem like it. Something in my chest shifted. Are you jealous? I asked, half joking. He held my gaze. Didn't blink. Should I be? That answer lingered between us longer than it should have. Up until that moment, whatever was happening between Edward and me had been unspoken. Late-night conversations in the kitchen. Accidental touches that lasted a second too long. The way he'd look at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention. We'd never labeled it. We'd never crossed any clear lines. But that question, that wasn't friendly. That depends, I said carefully. Do you want to be? His jaw tightened again. I just don't like the way he looks at you, Edward said quietly. I blinked. How does he look at me? Like you're his. The words hit harder than I expected. I stepped closer without really meaning to. And I'm not. His breathing shifted. Just slightly. I don't know what you are, he admitted. And that was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Because neither did I. George was my best friend. Safe. Easy. Familiar. Edward was something else. Something heavier. Something that made the air feel charged when we stood too close. You don't get to be territorial if you're not claiming anything, I said softly. His eyes darkened at that. I'm not territorial, he replied. I raised an eyebrow. You just interrogated me about my best friend. I asked a question. You asked three. He stepped even closer now. I could feel the warmth from his body. The tension wasn't subtle anymore. It was thick. I don't like the idea of him touching you, Edward said, voice lower. My heart was beating faster, and I hated that he could probably see it. Then what are you going to do about it? I asked. I don't know why I said that. Maybe I wanted him to finally admit it. Maybe I wanted him to snap. Instead, he exhaled slowly and stepped back. Nothing, he said. He's your friend. But the way he said friend sounded almost like an accusation. That night, I lay in bed replaying everything. The jealousy, the tension, the way his voice dropped when he talked about George touching me. And I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Edward wasn't afraid of losing me to George. He was afraid George already had something he didn't. And the messed up part? I wasn't entirely sure he was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating. George. Jim in 30. Don't bail. I groaned and rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling. My brain was still stuck in last night's hallway conversation. Does he always touch you like that? Should I be jealous? Like you're his. I grabbed my phone. On my way, I texted back. When I stepped into the kitchen, Edward was already there, leaning against the counter with a mug in his hand. Black coffee. Same as always. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. Morning, I said casually. Morning. There was a pause. You going somewhere? He asked, though he clearly already knew. Jim. With George. His jaw ticked again. Subtle. But there. Right. I grabbed a banana off the counter. You want to come? It slipped out before I could stop it. Edward hesitated. No. I've got work. That wasn't unusual. But the way he said it felt like he was declining more than just the gym. I nodded. Okay. As I walked past him toward the door, I felt it. That magnetic pull. The air shifted when I got close. It had been like this for weeks. Maybe months. He reached out suddenly, fingers brushing my wrist. Hey. I stopped. His hand didn't move away right away. Don't let him push you around, Edward said. I frowned. George. Yes. I almost laughed. He's not pushing me around. He acts like he owns you. That's just how he jokes. Edward's thumb moved slightly against my wrist before he seemed to realize what he was doing and let go. Just don't let him decide things for you, he said quietly. There was something deeper in that statement. Something not just about George. I held his gaze for a second too long. I don't, I said. But as I left the apartment, I wasn't entirely sure that was true. At the gym, George was in full chaotic mode. He shoved a protein bar into my chest when I walked in. You look distracted. I just woke up. No, you look emotionally distracted, he said dramatically, adjusting the weights on the bar. I rolled my eyes. Shut up. He smirked. Is this about your hot roommate? I froze. George caught everything. What? I said too quickly. Oh please, he laughed. The tension in that apartment is insane. Even I can feel it. I grabbed a dumbbell, avoiding eye contact. There's no tension. Sure. He stepped closer. He was staring at me like he wanted to murder me last night. He wasn't. He was. I hesitated. Okay, maybe a little, I admitted. George grinned like he'd just won something. See? I trailed off. Just what? He doesn't like how touchy you are. George blinked, then laughed. You're kidding. No. That made him pause. He's jealous. George asked slowly. I shrugged. He asked if he should be. George stared at me. Oh. The tone changed. He dropped the joking act for the first time that morning. And what did you say? He asked. I asked if he wanted to be. George's expression shifted in a way I couldn't fully read. And he pressed. And nothing. We didn't define anything. George stepped back slightly, folding his arms. You like him, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't know. I replied honestly. That's not a no. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's complicated. George looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped closer again, but this time, slower. More deliberate. His hand landed on my waist instead of my shoulder. Complicated how? He asked quietly. My pulse jumped. George. What? He said, searching my face. You think I don't notice how he looks at you? How you look at him? The gym noise faded into the background. Why do you care? I asked. His fingers tightened slightly. Because I don't like competing for you, he said. The words hit me in the chest. Competing? I echoed. Yeah, George said, jaw set now. If he's going to make a move, he should just do it. My heart was racing for a completely different reason now. And if he doesn't? I asked. George's eyes flicked down to my mouth for half a second before meeting my gaze again. Then maybe I will. Everything inside me went still. George had always been loud, playful, borderline flirty with everyone. But this wasn't a joke. Don't do that, I said softly. Do what? Make this messy. He searched my face again, like he was trying to decide something. Maybe it already is, he muttered. When I got back to the apartment 2 hours later, Edward was still at the kitchen table with his laptop. He looked up immediately. How was the gym? Fine. He studied me for a second. Did he touch you? He asked. The bluntness caught me off guard. Yes, I answered honestly. His fingers stilled on the keyboard. Where? I swallowed. Edward. Where? He repeated, voice lower now. I don't know what possessed me. Waste. Something snapped behind his eyes. He stood up slowly. Did you stop him? My mouth went dry. No. The silence that followed was heavy. He walked toward me, measured steps, until we were standing a foot apart. Do you want him? Edward asked. The question felt dangerous. I hesitated. And that hesitation? It was the worst possible answer. Edward's jaw tightened harder than I'd ever seen. You're enjoying this, he said quietly. Enjoying what? Having two people fight over you. I'm not. Don't lie. His voice wasn't loud. It was worse. Controlled. I'm not making you compete, I said. Then choose, he replied. My heart slammed against my ribs. Choose what? Who you want. The air between us felt like it could catch fire. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't about jealousy anymore. This was about possession. And I wasn't sure either of them was willing to lose. Choose who you want. Edward's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The intensity in his eyes was enough. I let out a shaky breath. You're acting like this is some kind of competition. Isn't it? He shot back. No. He stepped closer. Then why did you hesitate? That hit. Because he was right. I had hesitated. And I didn't know which part scared me more. The fact that I couldn't answer instantly, or the fact that he noticed. You don't get to demand something from me when you haven't even admitted what this is, I said. His jaw tightened again. What do you want me to admit? He asked quietly. That you like me, I replied. The words hung between us. He didn't deny it. But he didn't say it either. I don't like sharing, Edward finally said. That wasn't what I asked. You're not sharing, I said. I'm not an object. His eyes flashed. I know that. Then stop acting like George touching me is some betrayal. It is, he said. My chest tightened. How? Because he knows, Edward replied. Knows what? That there's something here. The honesty in that statement made my stomach flip. There it was. Finally. You just said there's something here, I pointed out. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair like he was losing control of the situation. There is, he admitted. My pulse started pounding in my ears. Then say it, I whispered. He looked at me like I was asking him to jump off a cliff. I don't like the way he looks at you, he said instead. I don't like the way he touches you. And I don't like that you let him. That's not the same as saying you want me. His breathing changed. I want you, he said. Simple. Direct. Heavy. The air between us shifted instantly. My heart felt like it dropped into my stomach. You want me? I repeated. Yes. Then why does it feel like you're angry at me? Because you don't look at him the way you look at me, Edward replied. That confused me. What? You don't, he insisted. But you let him think he has a chance. I swallowed. He does have a chance, I said quietly. That was the truth. And it hurt to say it. Edward went still. So I'm just an option, he said flatly. No. I stopped. He waited. You're not just an option, I finished softer. Then what am I? That question felt impossible. Because George was comfort. History. Easy laughter. Familiar hands on my shoulders. Edward was tension. Heat. Long stares that felt like they were peeling me open. With George, everything was loud and chaotic. With Edward, everything was quiet, but it burned deeper. I don't know, I admitted. Edward looked away for the first time. That scared me more than his jealousy. You kissed him? He asked suddenly. No. Would you? The fact that I couldn't answer immediately was loud enough. His shoulders stiffened. I see, he said. Edward. You like the attention, he muttered. That's not fair. You let him put his hands on your waist. He's my friend. He wants more than that. And what do you want? I snapped. Silence. Then he stepped closer again, closer than before. My back hit the wall this time without me realizing I'd moved. You, he said. Not angry. Not yelling. Just certain. My breath caught. Then act like it, I whispered. Something shifted in his expression. For weeks, months, he'd been holding back. Watching. Calculating. Controlling himself. But now he looked like he was done being patient. His hand came up slowly, deliberately, resting against the wall beside my head. Tell me to stop, he said quietly. My heart was racing so hard it hurt. I didn't. His other hand moved to my waist. The exact place I'd told him George had touched me. His fingers pressed there gently, but possessively. Did he stand this close? Edward asked, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. No, I breathed. His thumb traced slightly along my side. Did he make you feel like this? I swallowed hard. No. That answer came easier. His forehead almost brushed mine now. Then why are you hesitating? He whispered. Because George had history. Because George had said he'd make a move. Because choosing meant hurting someone. But in that moment, with Edward's hand on my waist and his eyes locked on mine, I knew one thing for sure. This didn't feel like an option. This felt inevitable. You're jealous, I said softly. Yes. Of my best friend. Yes. And you're still not backing down. His grip tightened slightly. No. My heart pounded against my ribs. Then maybe you shouldn't. That was the permission he'd been waiting for. His lips were inches from mine now. And just before he closed the distance, he said something that changed everything. If he tries to touch you again, I won't stay quiet. My breath hitched. Edward. But the door handle turned. We both froze. The front door opened. Yo, I forgot my. George stopped mid-sentence. He took in the scene instantly. Me. Pinned lightly against the wall. Edward's hand on my waist. The tension thick enough to suffocate the room. George's eyes darkened. Oh, he said slowly. And just like that, this wasn't private anymore. George didn't slam the door. He didn't yell. He just stood there. And somehow that was worse. Edward didn't move his hand from my waist right away. Almost like he was waiting to see if I'd step away first. I didn't. George's eyes dropped to where Edward was touching me. Then back to my face. Wow, he said quietly. So this is what we're doing now. My throat felt dry. It's not. Not what? George asked. Edward finally stepped back. Slowly. But not far. It's exactly what it looks like, Edward said calmly. George's attention snapped to him. I wasn't talking to you. I know, Edward replied. The tension in the room felt suffocating. I pushed off the wall, running a hand through my hair. You weren't supposed to come back. George let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, I can tell. Silence stretched between the three of us. Edward crossed his arms now, posture controlled, almost protective. Not aggressive, just steady. George looked at me again. Not joking, not teasing, just searching. So he said, you choosing him? That word again. Choosing. I hated that it sounded like a battlefield decision. It's not that simple, I muttered. It is, George shot back. It's literally that simple. Edward didn't interrupt this time. He just watched me, waiting. I felt cornered from both sides. I didn't plan this, I said. You walked in at a bad moment. George scoffed. A bad moment? He had you against the wall. Edward's jaw flexed, but he stayed silent. George stepped further into the apartment, closing the door behind him. Did you kiss him? He asked me. No. Were you about to? I hesitated. And that hesitation answered for me. George's expression shifted, not anger. Not exactly. Hurt. Damn, he muttered under his breath. George. No, it's fine, he said quickly, holding up a hand. I just needed to know where I stood. You don't stand anywhere, Edward said coolly. George's eyes flashed. Careful. I'm not the one who keeps pretending this is casual, Edward replied. That was the first time his voice sharpened. Pretending, George repeated. Yes, Edward said. You knew? George turned to me. You told him? I didn't have to, Edward answered before I could. You've been flirting for weeks, he continued. Touching him. Testing him. George didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at me. I was waiting for you to push me away, he said quietly. That hit harder than anything. You never did. Because I didn't want to. That was the problem. Edward took a slow breath. He shouldn't have to push you away. George laughed bitterly. You act like you own him. I don't, Edward replied. But I'm not scared to admit I want him. That landed. George's jaw tightened. Yeah, he said. You want him? Yes. The certainty in Edward's voice made my chest tighten. George's eyes moved back to me. And you? He asked. That was the real question. Edward wanted me. George wanted me. But what did I want? My heart was pounding so loud it felt impossible to think straight. I don't want to lose either of you, I admitted. George shook his head immediately. That's not how this works. Edward didn't argue. You can't keep both, George added quietly. And he was right. I stepped forward slightly, standing between them now. I didn't ask for this to turn into some rivalry. George let out a breath. It turned into that the second he decided he didn't like me touching you. Edward's voice dropped. Because you weren't just touching him. The tension spiked again. George's gaze sharpened. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Edward said slowly. You were checking if he'd choose you. George went quiet. Because again, it wasn't wrong. You were too. George shot back. Yes, Edward admitted. No shame. No denial. Just truth. And that was the difference between them. George flirted like it was a game. Edward stood there like it was a decision he was ready to fight for. I don't want to fight you, George said finally. Edward's answer came immediately. I don't either. They both looked at me. And suddenly I realized something. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about winning. It was about who I felt steady with. Who made my chest tighten because of comfort. And who made it tighten because of heat. George stepped closer to me. Tell me honestly, he said. When he touches you, does it feel different? My throat went dry. Yes. He nodded slowly, like he already knew. Edward didn't move, but his eyes never left my face. And when I touch you? George asked. I hesitated again, and that hesitation said enough. George looked down for a second, jaw clenched. Yeah, he muttered. The room felt unbearably quiet. Then George looked up. I don't want to be the guy you almost chose, he said. The words hit deep. Edward's posture softened just slightly. Then don't make him choose, George added. What? I frowned. George looked between us. You two have been orbiting each other for months. I'm not blind. I just thought. He let out a breath. I thought maybe I had a shot. You do, I said instinctively. He shook his head. No. I had a moment. That's different. He stepped back toward the door. George. He gave me a small smile. Not playful. Not sarcastic. Just real. If he screws this up, he said, nodding toward Edward, I'm not going to pretend I'm over it. Edward met his gaze evenly. I won't. Another long silence. Then George opened the door. Figure it out, he said to me. And then he was gone. The door shut softly behind him. The apartment felt twice as quiet. Edward and I stood there alone. The fight had evaporated. Now there was just the aftermath. I turned to him slowly. You're intense, I muttered. He almost smiled. You knew that? Yeah. A beat of silence. You still haven't chosen, he said. I stepped closer. No, I replied softly. His eyes darkened slightly. But I think I'm about to. He stopped in front of me, close but not touching. Say it again, Edward said quietly. I chose you. His eyes searched my face like he was still expecting hesitation. Like he didn't trust something this good to land clean. Because you're intense? He asked. I almost smiled. Because you're honest. That made something shift in him. He reached for me, slower this time, like he was giving me space to change my mind. I didn't. His hand slid to my waist again. That same spot. You don't get to go back and forth, he murmured. I'm not. And if he tries again? I won't let him. The confidence in my voice surprised even me. Edward studied me for another second, then pulled me in. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't heated or desperate. It was steady, grounded. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. I don't like feeling replaceable, he admitted quietly. You're not. I've been watching him with you for months, he said. I kept waiting for you to choose him. That hit harder than anything. You thought I would? You laughed differently with him. That made me blink. But I breathed differently with you, I replied. His jaw tightened, but this time not from jealousy. From something deeper. That night, we didn't rush anything. We sat on the couch, closer than usual. Our hands touched, then stayed touching. It wasn't explosive. It was calm. And that scared me more than passion ever could. Because calm meant real. The next few days were strange. Not dramatic. Not messy. Just different. Edward wasn't jealous anymore, but he was watching. Not George. Me. Like he was still making sure I wasn't slipping away. And George? He didn't disappear. He came over 2 days later. The atmosphere changed the second he walked in. He greeted me normally. Bumped fists. Casual. But when Edward entered the room, there was a silent understanding between them now. No pretending. No games. We all sat in the living room. It was awkward for maybe 5 minutes. Then George did something very George. So, he said casually, leaning back. Are we official, or is this still a dramatic slow burn? Edward didn't answer. I did. We're not casual. George nodded once. Good. That surprised me. He looked at Edward. You better not mess with his head. Edward held his gaze evenly. I won't. George's eyes shifted back to me. And you better not run if it gets serious. That hit. Because he knew me. I had a habit of stepping back when things felt too intense. Edward noticed my reaction. After George left that night, Edward asked quietly, Is that true? I shrugged. I don't know. He stepped closer. I'm not temporary, he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. And that's when I realized something important. Edward wasn't afraid of George anymore. He was afraid of me pulling away. You're not temporary, I said. Then don't treat this like something you can drop if it scares you. His honesty was brutal, but necessary, because he was right. Choosing him wasn't just about desire. It meant stepping into something serious. And that's when things got complicated. Because wanting someone is easy. Staying when it becomes real, that's different. A week later, the jealousy was gone. But something else replaced it. Vulnerability. Edward started opening up in small ways. About his last relationship, how he'd been the one left behind. About how he doesn't compete. About how he doesn't chase. If someone hesitates with me, he said one night in the kitchen, I stepped back. That made my chest tighten. You didn't step back, I pointed out. I almost did. That scared me more than George ever did. Why didn't you? I asked. He looked at me like the answer was obvious. Because you looked at me like you were trying to figure out if I was safe. I swallowed. And are you? I asked quietly. He stepped closer, brushing his fingers against my wrist. Yes. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just certain. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. George made me feel wanted. Edward made me feel chosen. There's a difference. And the night everything fully settled wasn't when we kissed. It wasn't when I chose him. It was when George came over again, laughed with me like always, and Edward didn't tense. He didn't watch. He just sat beside me, steady, not threatened, because he knew. And so did I. I wasn't caught between two people anymore. I had made a decision, not out of pressure, not out of intensity, but because with Edward, I didn't feel like someone being fought over. I felt like someone being kept.